Hey everybody, this is Perch. There's a lot of conversation about backup stories and should I have to pay for a backup story and what do we do here with these stories? Well, it's an interesting problem because in a lot of cases, I think the idea of a backup story, the idea of you take something that is just not quite ready for a comic on its own. It does not have the built-in audience. It's been on the bubble, and then you include it as a backup story. It's a good one. I think generally it's a good plan. The flaw in that plan is kind of twofold. First off, because it's a backup story, you're going to be applying cheaper talent. Something that when I did the video on the price increase, a number of people, including my frequent collaborator, Joe Corallo, pointed out is that these backup stories are often commissioned and solicited with cheaper art teams. And of course, I mean, think about it just logically. If the backup story, whatever it might be, if it was strong enough to stand on its own, then you'd certainly put a more known, more recognizable, more expensive art team on it. But if you're already admitting that this backup story doesn't have that ability, it doesn't have the backing, the support to be a standalone title, then why should you spend money on putting a strong art team behind it? Now, I would argue, by the way, if you're a DC or a Marvel, you're somebody who's trying to kind of manage a portfolio of comics, you want to grow the available comics to sell. So I think you should always have some really talented artists in your stable that you would put on backup stories because you want to give more attention. What you want to do is try and get a following to these characters so that you can spin them off into regular titles. Now, this is something in the 80s, Marvel Comics Presents used to do this fairly regularly, and there's some other examples of titles that would do it, including all the team-up books that both Marvel and DC did. But in Marvel Comics Presents, you did have stories by Jim Lee, by John Byrne, by Barry Windsor Smith, by John Buscema. You had a number of known, recognizable talents doing comics, and not just on the art side, on the writing side as well. Every major writer that Marvel had at the time did a story there. And the purpose was, hey, if there's a really strong fan reaction to this chapter, then we'll make a comic out of it. We'll we'll do a limited series or an ongoing book. That makes sense. So to a lot of extent, I think that when you're talking about DC and they're leaning very heavily into this backup story idea, and a lot of the creators are making comments really expressing a lot of happiness about this, that it's giving more creative flexibility to DC creative teams. It's giving more opportunities for people to come in and do stories. And while all of that is true, it feels like a mission destined to failure, partly because of this issue of they then put creative teams on it that are not ready for prime time, and everyone knows it. By the way, as an aside, I think there's this very weird disconnect that goes on in comics. And I just, from talking to a number of people at the publishers, I notice a lot of people saying, I don't think fans notice things like that. And when they say things like that, they mean the creative team. I think there's this perception within comics, within the publishers, that people know you got one layer, which is your Jim Lee or your that high end talent there, the people who sell a lot of books. I mean, like on Marvel, you have your Ed McGuinness maybe there. You have your some of the people they rotate in and out of the X books. You have people who are big names who you can put them on a book and they'll sell well. These are like your champions. And then there's this belief that everything under that's all kind of the same. That your middle, your non big names like I don't know. There's a lot of artists right now at Marvel and DC that are not recognizable names, but they've got some talent. They have a following. They make the page pop. One could argue Joel A. Jones, who I think is incredible, is one of these talents where very solid, great on the book, looks great, is not a household name that's going to move books all on their own. Yeah, maybe that's not the best example, but there's this idea that everybody under the superstars is the same. And I don't think that's remotely true. I think there are far more layers. Like wrestling, you got your upper card, your mid card, your jobbers. You have a number of different layers. And so if you're going to put complete unknown people on a backup story, it does send the message to the customers that you have very little confidence in this backup story, that it's basically it's throwaway work to somebody that you've never heard of and you may never hear of again. Uh, I think that sounds very cynical and negative when I say that to publishers, and I've been I've been told that, but that is how the customers view it. The challenge is even that might be accepted, but when you're also raising the price, you're doing something that sends a double negative to your customer base. They're getting the message of, hey, here's this backup story. You didn't ask for it. So, for all intents and purposes to you, the customer, it's advertising. And unfortunately, that's how most customers view these backup stories. They do not view it as bonus. They don't view it as additional comic. They view it as an ad. They're paying to consume an ad because this backup story was not asked for. So therefore, it's marketing. That's how a lot of the customers see it. So if you're giving them some marketing they didn't ask for, you're putting a creative team that is unknown and maybe not quite ready for prime time, and you're charging an extra dollar, you're doing multiple bad things all at once. And it's going to turn your customer base largely against you. And it has the reaction to the DC books and the backup stories is pretty negative, like pretty aggressively negative. And it's a shame because DC arguably is trying to do something kind of new and different and give people more exposure to characters and get some characters out there that people haven't heard of and wanted in a title, but they can't quite justify doing it. That should be a good thing. And again, not to belabor the point, if you go back to Marvel Comics Presents, Marvel very successfully was able to send the message to their customers saying, hey, this title isn't this character isn't worthy of their own title. However, we heard you. You demanded some stories for this character. I remember there was a pretty transparent letter in one of these around Sunspot, and some fans were asking for, I would like a comic. Why doesn't Sunspot have his own ongoing series? And Marvel answered back very candidly, Sunspot, we couldn't justify the sales. The Sunspot doesn't have enough fans to support a title on their own. Imagine just being this transparent to their readers. They were just saying this. But, hey, good news for you. We've got a small little Sunspot solo story coming up in Marvel Comics Presents. You should go check that out. And who knows, if it's really popular, maybe we will see that Sunspot title one day. That was how they addressed it. And so it came off as a positive. And so when people picked it up and maybe the art team, even though Marvel Comics Presents did typically bring pretty strong artists, things like that, and Solo Avengers and some of these other titles, the fans kind of got the message that this was a tryout, and they're paying for it, but they're opting into that tryout. They're opting into it, and so they turned it into a positive. What DC has done is a very similar approach, but unfortunately, the negative is they're basically saying if you want to read Batman, you're forced to get this other story. If you want to read Superman, you're gonna get this Midnighter story. Now, did you want this Midnight? Is the Superman fan audience have a strong crossover with Midnighter? I doubt it. But they're basically saying you are going to consume this. This is something you're going to have, and that is that nobody likes to be told that. Customers don't like it, and so they're saying you're going to get this. It's going to be by a B-level art team, and we're gonna charge more for it. Many people will feel resentful at that point, which is the exact opposite of what you want. You want your customers going, oh man, I really want a Midnighter story, and they're not giving me one, but hey, I can pick up this comic and get a little bit of Midnighter, and at least I get something there. That's a good thing, but they've screwed up the message. And so instead, it feels like the story is inflicted on you while you're getting billed for it. And that's the problem. It's where the whole message has gone backwards. I don't know. I think it pains me because I think they're doing something that could arguably be cool, but the execution of it is just it's guaranteeing frustration from their customers. The exact opposite of what they want. What do you think? Do you like these backup stories? Do you feel like you're getting charged for something you didn't really ask for? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and thanks for listening.